Good morning. Again, my name is Jennifer Homendy, and I'm chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. The NTSB is an independent federal agency charged by Congress with not only investigating every civil aviation accident in the United States, but significant events in other modes of transportation, including public transit. And our mission is to determine what happened, why it happened, to prevent an accident or incident from occurring again. And we issue safety recommendations at any time throughout an investigation. Could be urgent, could be at the conclusion of investigation, aimed at preventing fatalities and serious injuries and saving lives. With me today is Joe Gordon, who is a railroad accident investigator in our Office of Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials Investigations. Joe is serving as investigator in charge, what we call the IIC, for this investigation. Also with us is Joey Ryan and Greg Scott from the same office. They are also railroad accident investigators. However, our team is growing. We have additional members of the Office of Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials joining the investigation, as well as our Office of Research and Engineering. On October 12, 2021, at 4:51 p.m., WMATA Metrorail Train 407 derailed between Roslyn and Arlington Cemetery. The train was southbound on track 2 on the blue line heading towards Huntington Station with 187 passengers on board. One passenger was transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Train 407 consisted of 8 7000 series cars. What's significant for us, along with other issues, is that the derailment just south of Roslyn was the last of at least 3 known derailments of train 407 that train experienced that day. There may have been other derailments that day, and I'm going to go into a little bit more information on that. There could have been derailments involving that train in the days leading up to October 12th. So just to go through the timeline a bit on that day. Train 407 began service on the Blue Line at Franconia Springfield Station from the start of the day until 11 a.m. when it switched to service on the Silver Line. It traveled on the Silver Line until 1:43 p.m. when it switched back to the Blue Line. The train departed Franconia at 2:58 p.m. on track number 1, headed to Largo. The train then traveled through Arlington Cemetery at 3:23 p.m. on track 1, where it derailed and re-railed itself. Investigators recovered broken sections of a brake disc around Arlington Cemetery. It then continued past Arlington Cemetery to Largo Town Center. The train arrived at Largo and headed back to Franconia on track 2. It derailed and re-railed itself at Largo at 4:13 p.m. Investigators again recovered broken sections of brake disc at Largo. It then traveled 15 miles back to Roslyn, where we know the known third derailment occurred on the way back to Franconia, about 150 feet south of the Roslyn station at 4:51 p.m. The train traveled another 1,800 feet when it stopped and came to rest in the tunnel. Now, what we're focused on, the many issues we're focused on, but one of the biggest one is the wheel assemblies and how the wheels are riding on the track. And with that, I want to turn over the mic to Joe Gordon. Again, he's our investigator in charge for a few minutes on to talk about what the investigators found, and then I'm going to come back and talk about more information. So, Joe?
Thank you, Chair Homendy. The initial NTSB investigation team arrived on scene on Wednesday morning, and after arrival at the Arlington Cemetery Station, we walked back to the accident train, which was in the tunnel on number 2 track. NTSB performed a preliminary assessment of the accident train, and then we walked further back towards Roslyn Station and identified an area where the derailment had occurred. The point of derailment was identified in a switch just outside of the Roslyn Station. We also identified car brake disc parts that were dislodged from the car during the derailment. The final resting location of the train was about 1,800 feet south of the point of derailment. As the investigation continued, we noted damage on number 1 track north of Arlington Cemetery Station. In this location, we also identified and recovered additional brake disc parts. These parts were different from the previously recovered parts. We noted indication of a prior derailment in the switch in this area. Once we confirmed that there was more than one derailment, we set out to see if we could find any other areas on this train's route where derailments had occurred. This led to several investigative actions. WMATA initiated a special track inspection along the route that the train had traveled. NTSB reviewed measurements that were taken from a system that's on board the 7000 series cars, some of the 7000 series cars, that measure in-train forces, and we also conducted a review of station platform video to see if any of these events were captured on platform video as the train was traveling. This led us to another derailment location outside of the Largo Town Center Station, about 15 miles from the Arlington Cemetery Station. That's about 15 track miles from the location of the previously identified derailment. In this location, we again saw evidence of a ground running derailment and car body movement. We also collected additional brake parts. In addition, WMATA reiterated an existing rule that they have that their operators report rough track that they encounter during regular operation. On the derailed car, we found that the wheels had moved outboard on the axle, causing the train to derail when traveling through switches. So the wheel sets have a gauge that's standard that interfaces with the track that's also a standard gauge. As these wheel sets went outboard on the axle, that caused the train to encounter switches differently than it's designed to go through the switches. So based on the findings, WMATA began an inspection of all 7000 series cars, and Chair Homendy will speak more about that.
During the course of the preliminary investigation, we were made aware that WMATA was aware of this situation with the wheel assemblies going back to 2017. They made us aware of, and I want to stress, these are preliminary numbers. These numbers could change over the course of the next few days, weeks, or months. We're continuing to follow up on this, so again, I just stress this is preliminary. But we were made aware of 2 failures in 2017, 2 failures in 2018, 4 failures in 2019, 5 in 2020, 18 in 2021, so these are going up. And that was before Friday, so that totaled 31. Adding to that number are the failures that were uncovered as a result of their inspections, which were initiated on Friday, which uncovered so far an additional 21 failures. So what we're looking at is going from 2 in 2017, 2 in 2018, 4 in 2019, 5 in 2020, to 18 plus 21 for a total of 39 in 2021, which is significant. So we're talking in total, all of that added up is 52. But again, those are preliminary numbers. They may increase because currently we are aware that of the 748 cars in the series, they have inspected 514, so that number could go up as the day goes on or the days coming. I do want to mention the parties to the investigation: the Federal Transit Administration, Washington Metrorail Safety Commission, WMATA, and the Amalgamated Transit Union. The benefit of becoming a party to our investigation is you learn about safety deficiencies at the time we are learning them so that you can take action to protect public safety. In this situation, Washington Metrorail Safety Commission, based on what we were learning in the course of our investigation, chose to remove from revenue service all 7,000 series cars. But again, that it is a benefit of being a party to our investigation, so you can learn of safety deficiencies as they are identified and able to take corrective action. I will also stress that we are concerned about other transit agencies in the United States. These cars were made by Kawasaki, and so we may, at some point, issue an urgent recommendation, or I'd say if you're a transit agency operating in the United States and you're listening, make sure that you're checking your cars as well. But this is something we're going to be looking at in the course of this investigation to determine if there are more systemic issues throughout the U.S. and throughout transit systems operating in the U.S. Before I take questions, here's what I want to stress. We are fortunate that no fatalities or serious injuries occurred as a result of any of these derailments. But the potential for fatalities and serious injuries was significant. This could have resulted in a catastrophic event, which is why we went and why it's important that we identify these safety issues in advance so we can protect public safety. So with that, we'll take some questions. Please identify yourself by name and your affiliation.
Tom Rousey, ABC 7 News here in D.C. When you mentioned the number of failures you just gave, is that a derailment each time? And if these are derailments, how is it that the trains are so easily getting back on the tracks after?
Yeah, so the question was for the 31 that were previously identified, how were they able to get back on the track, and was a derailment and re-rail, did that occur at the time? That is something we still have to determine. We were informed that they did not result in a derailment, that they were identified through measurements in their 90-day inspection intervals. But again, that's something that we have to confirm with respect to how they were able to get back on. My understanding so far is that WMATA was working with Kawasaki to address potential safety issues. We have to still get information and data on how that was addressed, what discussions were taking place, what data they relied on for determining what the safety issues were, and the decision making in the resolution that they chose. So that's more information to come.
Bruce Lachey from WUSA 9 here in town. Did WMATA take appropriate action going back to 2017 in addressing this? And if not, why not?
The question is whether WMATA took appropriate action going back to 2017 to address the situation, and if not, why not? That is exactly one of the questions we have in this investigation, and something we will be looking at, because we do want to look at decision making on WMATA's part, what actions we're taking, and what led them to those actions, and whether they were sufficient. Sir.
Justin George, Washington Post. I'm wondering, it's early, but are these problems fixable, or are these trains need to be taken down and they can be down for a while? And what does that do to the transportation system of this region, which really depends on transit?
Yeah, the question is, what does this do to the region if these cars need to be taken down, and do these cars need to be taken out of service for any significant amount of time? I mean, this was a decision that the Safety Commission made. I will say, from a safety standpoint, we're happy that they prioritized safety, because again, this could have been catastrophic. So their focus here was public safety. I do appreciate, though, that Metro provides transportation for a significant number of people in the Metro region, and that is something that I would say you'd have to ask the Safety Commission about, because it came out of their order. Sir, I know you had your hands up.
With WMU. Is this a manufacturer defect? Is this something that changes over time and use? Do you know more about that?
The question is this a manufacturing defect and something that may change over time? We have to determine that still. Again, we're at the preliminary stages of our investigation, just trying to collect data and information related to what was experienced last week and what we're learning as more and more information is identified, but that we'll have to look at.
Hi, Melanie Allway from Fox 5 in DC. So the wheels, is that separate from what was identified in the Metrorail Safety Report as wheels out of ground? Because it sounds like you're talking about wheels that kind of spread apart versus not being
You wanted further clarification on the wheel assembly. So you have an axle and the two wheels, and the wheels are moving outward. And so they take a measurement every 90 days to make sure they're in spec, and if they're too far in or too far out, then it fails the test. So that's a 90-day inspection. The last time these were inspected was July. This car was inspected was July 29th, 2021. Its 90-day inspection interval was up on October 27th.
And a follow-up question, please, just for clarification. When you say failures, do you mean a failure being that the wheels were too wide? Were out of alignment is considered a failure, not an actual incident on the rail, but identifying that the wheels are not where they should be.
The question is clarification on the word failure, and whether that means failing the measurements or actual derailment. I'd say in a way both, because the measurements exceed the specs. And so what we're talking about here is wheel assembly. The wheels in this situation were going outward. David.
Two questions. Dave Sherwood from Reuters. First, can you tell us how many other transit agencies use similar train cars? And again, I know you don't want to speculate, but given that upwards of 60% of the cars are out of service here, is this something on a short-term basis could be addressed through more stepped-up inspections,
Yeah, the question was how extensive is this issue for other transit agencies in the United States, and whether this is something that could be addressed through just increased inspections. For both, we still have to determine whether other transit agencies are affected, but this is something that'll be part of our investigations, this investigation. And then with respect to inspection intervals, that again, that's the grounding of this fleet was a decision by the Safety Commission. They'll have to look at part of that order was looking at what the appropriate resolution might be, and they're going to have to determine that. But certainly that's something we're going to look at in the course of this investigation, what might be the appropriate remedies.
You said that you found parts from the brake assembly in Largo and another location. How significant was that failure? Would it have, how much would it have affected the ability to stop the train in an emergency?
The question was on the portions of the broken brake discs that were found in Largo and in around Arlington Cemetery, and I'm going to turn to Joe to answer that question.
Yes, and so the brake components that we found that were dislodged from the car became dislodged from the car after the derailment. So it was because of the ground running, the displacement from the track, and the fact that they were encountering other track components that they became dislodged from the car. And your question as to when they were damaged and on the car, it would have certainly affected the braking of that car in that consist of the train.
But you said you found brake parts in Largo. That would have been prior to
the final derailment, but it derailed. So the train derailed in Largo as well and re-railed. And I know there was a previous question, if that's okay, about the derailment mechanism. So as we've spoken about the wheels moving out on the axle, the wheels of course have flangeways. Those keep them on the fixed guideway that's the rail system, okay? So when they move out, as it encountered when you get into a switch or a turnout, which you typically see beyond a station, and that's the area where the train switches from one track to the other, as you go through those, there are flange ways that allow the flange on the wheel to pass through, and that's where that transition is made from one track to the other. So the flange ways, in this case, with the wheels being out of place, they contacted the frog point on the switch, on the facing point. As it was going through a switch, it would contact a frog point. It would go up on top of the frog point, get to the heel of the frog, and it would derail off of the rails. It would run off of the rails ground running until it got to the other end of a turnout. When it got to the other end of the turnout, it would basically go back on in reverse of the way that it came off. The reason that Roslyn was a final location is there was no turnout, there was no crossover at Roslyn. So Roslyn was a single switch. So the train did not encounter the components on the other end that would have corralled the wheel sets and put them back in place on the rail. So the previous derailment, Arlington, re-railed, goes to Largo, outbound at Largo, derails and re-rails, and then when it gets to Roslyn, it derails and it does not have the receiving end of that turnout to re-rail the train.
And I would add at Roslyn that there was some damage to the third rail, and that there was arcing. The power was shut off within a minute, but again, that's why we talk about this could have been catastrophic if we're talking about, cars hitting the side of a tunnel or potential for a fire or arcing that continued past, the point of when they were able to shut that down. I thought there were, yeah.
Hi, Rick Wallace at CNN. Going back to other systems that might be affected, has NTSB had any conversations with other systems or other systems reaching out? Can you tell us about any conversations, communications?
Not at this point.
Yeah, not at this point. I'm sorry. The question was, have we had other conversations with other transit systems since the start of our investigation? Not yet. That will come. But at this point, we're really focused on the situation here at Metro. Justin?
Just really quick, I want to ask, do you know what other transit agencies in the United States have Kawasaki rail cars? And then second of all, I just want to be clear, I can tell this is clearly catastrophic, could have been catastrophic, but does the NTSB agree with pulling the entire line out of service? Would this have been something the NTSB would have done itself? Is that, I just want to see, again, if that course of action, which clearly is for safety and in safety's case, but would it be something that the NTSB would have done itself?
The question is, would have removing the 7000 series from operation been something that the NTSB had done? We certainly could have recommended that. We don't have the authority to order that, of course. But again, we were still looking for information, identifying all the safety issues, and this is a advantage of being a party member to our investigations, where you can take immediate action if you have concerns about public safety. And I will reiterate, outside of the fact that this could have been catastrophic, I appreciate that the Safety Commission put safety first in this situation, and they needed a good handle, and we still need a good handle of how extensive this issue is, both in Metro and transit agency-wide throughout the United States.
Hi, Christy Patino, WDBM 25. I spoke to a woman who was on the train, and she said that one of the cars started to fill with smoke and haze. Wanted to see if you could confirm that, if you have any new details as to what could cause that smoke.
The question is whether there was smoke. There were reports that I had seen about smoke that had filled the car or in the train. There was arcing, so that certainly could have caused some smoke. We don't have information on that to lead us to any firm conclusions on whether there was smoke. I will say that when you're in a tunnel, there's a lot of debris, and certainly when a rail car derails, that kicks up a lot of debris as well, a lot of dust. So it could be that as well, but something that we're looking at further.
Was the NTSB notified of these incidents before this investigation?
The excellent question was, were we notified of the previous incidents of failure going back to 2017? The answer is we were notified of that during this investigation. We were not notified prior to this investigation.
Last question.
I wanted to ask, how concerned are you that train 407 wasn't pulled out of service earlier in the day? If they're finding brake parts, shouldn't it have already been out of service by the time it derailed the third time?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Joe to take that question.
Yeah, because of the coupler system on transit cars, they're married pairs of cars, so it's not like a freight car where you're going in and switching cars to go to different locations. These train consists get put together, and for the most part, they run around in that same assembly. So as there's a robust coupling system that didn't separate the train, which would have initiated a brake application. And with the operator's cab, this car being 4 cars back in the consist, the operator's cab, he was far enough ahead that according to interviews, there was nothing felt from his perspective when these previous derailments occurred. So we'll be looking at that further in the investigation, but that's what we know currently.
Thank you very much.
Is there any indication any other series cars might be?
We did find the brake parts afterwards. They didn't know. No brake parts were found. They were found as a part of our investigation.
Thank you very much.
Cars?